Have you ever asked a woman, "What's wrong?" and she said nothing, but you knew something definitely was? Here's what I'm about to prove to you. In that moment, you weren't witnessing confusion or dishonesty. You were witnessing the most sophisticated form of human communication ever developed, and you just didn't know the language. What if women have been speaking the clearest language of all, and we've been listening with primitive ears to advanced communication? I'm going to take you on a journey that will completely transform how you hear every nothing, every fine, every response that seems to say one thing while meaning another. Because by the time we return to that moment, when she said nothing, but you knew better, you'll realize you weren't witnessing a communication problem. You were witnessing emotional genius in real time. Let's start with why we've been so wrong about this. She said she was fine, but her eyes told a different story. Sound familiar? For generations, we've been sold the same tired narrative. Women never mean what they say. It's become cultural gospel, whispered in boardrooms and shouted from comedy stages. She says nothing's wrong, but clearly something is. When she says fine, run for the hills. We've built entire relationship philosophies around this supposed female duplicity. But what if I told you this isn't a story about women at all? What if it's a story about us and our profound failure to understand the language being spoken right in front of us? Psychology has given us mountains of research supporting this myth. Studies show women use more indirect communication, tag questions like "isn't it?" and hedging language like "sort of." Robin Lakoff's pioneering work identified 10 linguistic features supposedly unique to women's speech: the tentative, the apologetic, the unclear. We've documented it, measured it, and used it to confirm what we already believed. The evidence seems bulletproof. Women do communicate differently. They do use more emotional language, more relationship-focused dialogue, more collaborative discourse strategies. When conflicts arise, research shows women employ what scholars call emotive language, while men prefer direct assertion. The pattern is undeniable. But here's where the story gets interesting, and where most people stop digging. What if these communication patterns aren't flaws to be decoded? What if they're not signs of confusion or manipulation? What if women aren't speaking unclearly? What if we've been listening with the wrong ears? Because here's what the research actually reveals when you look deeper. Women's indirect communication serves a precise psychological function. It's not about hiding meaning. It's about preserving connection while navigating complex social realities that most of us can't even see. You see, when she says fine, she might be communicating something far more sophisticated than simple emotional state. She might be saying, "I'm managing multiple relationship dynamics, reading emotional undercurrents you haven't noticed, and choosing harmony over confrontation because I understand the social cost of direct conflict in ways you don't." That's not unclear communication. That's emotional intelligence in real time. We're about to take a journey, one that will completely transform how you hear every fine, every maybe, every seemingly indirect response. By the time we're done, you'll realize the greatest communication mystery isn't what women mean when they don't say what they mean. It's why we've been so convinced they don't mean what they say at all. The myth is about to crumble, and what we discover underneath will change everything. Remember that fine we started with? Let's pull back the curtain on what's really happening in that moment. While we've been obsessing over whether women mean what they say, we've completely missed the most profound truth. They're speaking an entirely different language, not metaphorically, literally. A language we've never bothered to learn. Communication psychology reveals something extraordinary. Men and women have fundamentally different objectives when they speak. Men typically communicate to maintain status or achieve specific goals, what researchers call report talk. Women? They use rapport talk, communication designed to build relationships and create connections. Think about it this way. Imagine you're fluent in Spanish, but every conversation you have is being judged by someone who only speaks English. They hear your words but miss your meaning entirely. Then they conclude you're a poor communicator. That's exactly what's been happening. When women use what linguists call lexical hedges, phrases like sort of, and well, they're not being uncertain. They're being relationally intelligent. These aren't signs of weakness. They're sophisticated tools for maintaining social harmony while still expressing opinions. Consider tag questions. It's really good, isn't it? We've labeled this as seeking validation, but research from the ethnography of communication shows it's actually an invitation for dialogue. It's saying, I have an opinion and I value yours too. That's not indecision. That's emotional intelligence in action. Here's where it gets fascinating. This communication style serves a critical psychological function called relationship maintenance. Women are performing what researchers call emotional labor, the invisible work of managing interpersonal dynamics, soothing tensions, and ensuring group cohesion. Every rising intonation, every softened statement is actually sophisticated social engineering. She's reading the room, managing multiple relationship dynamics simultaneously, and communicating in a way that preserves connection while still expressing her authentic thoughts. But here's the kicker. This emotional labor is so invisible that we've mistaken it for confusion. We've interpreted emotional intelligence as emotional instability. We've labeled relationship wisdom as relational dishonesty. When she says fine, she might be communicating, I'm choosing to manage this conflict in a way that preserves our relationship long term, even though I could express my frustration more directly right now. That's not avoiding the truth. That's speaking a deeper truth about human connection that most people never learn. The research is crystal clear. Women's communication patterns aren't flawed versions of male communication. They're entirely different systems optimized for entirely different outcomes. And we've been judging one system by the rules of another. So the question isn't whether women mean what they say. The question is, are we finally ready to learn the language they've been speaking all along? Because what we're about to discover will transform not just how you hear women, but how you understand the very nature of human connection itself. You've experienced this firsthand, haven't you? You've watched the women in your life shift between completely different communication styles and wondered if you're dealing with the same person. Your wife says, I'm fine, when you forget to pick up groceries. But when you forget to pick up your daughter from school, her voice cuts through the phone. This ends now. We need to talk tonight. Your daughter quietly accepts being teased by classmates about her clothes. But when those same kids start mocking her younger brother, she becomes a fierce protector. Leave him alone or you'll deal with me. Here's what psychology reveals. These aren't mood swings. Women are channeling what psychologists call archetypal energies, 7 distinct patterns of feminine expression that have existed across every culture throughout human history. Think of it like this. Every woman has 7 different modes she can switch between, like changing radio stations. Each mode makes her communicate in a completely different way. The mother mode is all about protecting and caring. When she asks, "Are you sure about that?" she's not doubting you. She's worried about you getting hurt. The queen mode is about being in charge and commanding respect. The maiden mode is playful and curious, always asking, what if we tried something new? The huntress mode is fierce and independent. She makes decisions fast and sticks to them. The sage mode is the wise teacher, sharing lessons through stories and gentle guidance. The mystic mode speaks in feelings and intuition, saying things like, something doesn't feel right about this. And the lover mode is all about connection and passion, making everything about deeper meaning and intimacy. Here's the crazy part. Big life changes flip these switches automatically. When a woman becomes a mom, it's like someone turned up the volume on her mother mode. When she hits menopause, suddenly her sage mode gets louder and she starts giving advice she never gave before. Same woman saying, "I'm worried about us," could mean totally different things. In mother mode, she wants to fix and protect the relationship. In lover mode, she wants more romance and connection. In mystic mode, she's sensing something deeper is wrong. Identical words, completely different conversations. But here's what we've been doing wrong. We call this confusing. We say she's overreacting when mother mode kicks in, or she's bossy when queen mode takes over, or she's unrealistic when mystic mode starts talking about feelings. We've been treating this natural switching system like it's a problem that needs to be fixed. Sometimes these modes even fight with each other inside her head. The maiden part that wants freedom battles with the mother part that wants to protect everyone. When that happens, her words might sound mixed up, but it's not confusion. It's different parts of her having an argument, and we're only hearing one side. Remember that fine from the beginning? It could be mother mode keeping peace, queen mode staying dignified, sage mode knowing that you need to figure some things out yourself, or huntress mode deciding this battle isn't worth her energy. Same word, 7 possible meanings. We just never learn to tell the difference. Now that you understand the 7 modes women operate from, here's the devastating truth. Most of these modes have been systematically silenced. Picture this. You're in a foreign country where only men are allowed to speak the official language in public. Women can think in their native tongue, but when they need to communicate important ideas, they must translate everything. Through a language designed by and for men, some thoughts simply can't be translated. Others lose their meaning entirely. This isn't a metaphor. This is exactly what's been happening to women's communication for centuries. This isn't accidental. Communication researchers call it muted group theory. Here's how it works. Imagine a company where all the rules about professional communication were written by people who naturally speak loudly, interrupt often, and never ask questions. Now imagine a group of employees who naturally speak softly, listen carefully, and ask thoughtful questions before making decisions. When review time comes, guess whose communication style gets labeled leadership material, and whose gets called lacking confidence. The system isn't evaluating better or worse communication. It's just measuring how closely you match the people who wrote the rules. Think about it. Who decided that interrupting means leadership? Who determined that raising your voice equals authority? Who created the rule that emotional intelligence is somehow less valuable than cold facts? Here's what decades of research show. Women's natural communication styles, the relationship-building questions, the collaborative language, the intuitive insights, weren't rejected because they were ineffective. They were rejected because they threatened the existing power structure. Your wife saying, "I'm fine," when you forgot to pick up your daughter. That's not avoidance. That's centuries of training. Because women learned that mother mode's protective anger gets them labeled hysterical. Queen mode's righteous authority makes them bossy. Mystic mode's gut feelings are dismissed as irrational. So they adapted. They learned to communicate their truth in ways that wouldn't trigger the system designed to silence them. Picture growing up as a girl and noticing something weird. Your mom never just says, "Take out the trash." She says, "Could you maybe take out the trash when you get a chance?" Your teacher says, "Sorry, but I think this answer might be wrong," instead of just, "This is wrong." Your female boss takes forever to make a simple point. Why? Because when women speak directly, people call them mean or bossy. But when men speak the exact same way, people call them strong leaders. The brilliance of this silencing system is that it didn't need to be obvious. Women weren't banned from speaking. They were just made to understand that when they spoke authentically, they wouldn't be heard correctly, or worse, they'd be punished for it. And then we had the audacity to call their adapted communication confusing or indirect. But here's the plot twist that changes everything. The women who navigated this system didn't just survive it, they mastered it. They developed communication strategies so sophisticated that they could speak their truth while protecting themselves from the consequences. You're about to discover how they did it, and why their confusing communication is actually emotional genius. So women faced an impossible choice: speak authentically and face consequences, or adapt their communication and be misunderstood. What they created in response wasn't confusion, it was genius. Picture Sarah again, the woman we met earlier. When her boss overlooked her for promotion, she didn't say, "I'm fine," because she was confused about her feelings. She said it because she was calculating. In 0.3 seconds, her brain ran this algorithm. If I express my true anger, I'll be labeled emotional and hurt my future chances. If I stay quiet, I preserve relationships while I figure out my next strategic move. That's not indecision. That's emotional intelligence operating at superhuman levels. Psychology researchers call this self-protective communication, and it reveals something profound. What we've been calling indirect communication is actually women performing real-time risk assessment on every single word they speak. Think about the psychological weight of this. Imagine if every conversation required you to instantly calculate, will my natural response be heard correctly? Will it damage relationships? Will it cost me opportunities? Now imagine doing this calculation thousands of times per day, for decades. Your colleague who stays quiet during unfair treatment isn't weak. She's running complex social algorithms that most people can't even see. She's weighing the emotional labor of maintaining team harmony against the personal cost of speaking up. She's considering how her words will affect not just herself, but the entire network of relationships she's responsible for managing. When she finally delivers that devastating feedback, it's not because she suddenly found courage. It's because her calculations finally aligned. The situation became serious enough that the risk of staying silent outweighed the risk of speaking her truth. Here's what's heartbreaking. This constant calculation creates what researchers call authenticity fragmentation. Women split themselves into pieces: the self they are, the self they show, and the self they think others want to see, all to navigate a communication system that punishes their natural expression. But here's the twist that changes everything. This adaptation created something extraordinary. Women developed communication superpowers. They can read micro-expressions, manage multiple emotional currents simultaneously, and convey complex messages through subtle cues that direct communicators completely miss. That "fine" we keep returning to. It's not a simple word. It's a data packet containing layers of information about emotional state, relationship dynamics, future intentions, and social context. She's not hiding meaning. She's communicating in a language so sophisticated that we never learned to decode it. The real question isn't why women don't mean what they say. It's why we've been listening with such primitive ears to such advanced communication. Then something changed. Something that would expose this entire system and prove once and for all that women's communication wasn't the problem. Our understanding of it was. Social media arrived. Suddenly, women had platforms where they could communicate without interruption, without being labeled by their tone of voice, without someone deciding their collaborative questions meant uncertainty. For the first time in human history, women could express their archetypal voices at full volume. And what happened? The explosion of creativity was staggering. Women didn't become clearer communicators. They revealed they had always been clear. We just hadn't been listening properly. Watch a woman build a community on Instagram. She's using pure mother mode, nurturing connections, asking, "How are you really doing?" and creating safe spaces for vulnerable conversations. On LinkedIn, the same woman switches to queen mode, posting authoritative insights that command respect from thousands of followers. On TikTok, her mystic mode shares intuitive wisdom that millions find life-changing. 7 different platforms, 7 different archetypal expressions, one brilliantly clear communicator. But here's where it gets fascinating. Even in digital spaces, the old silencing patterns try to reassert themselves. Women face new pressures, the perfect Instagram life, the careful LinkedIn tone, the constant threat of harassment for speaking too boldly. The medium changed, but the ancient dance between authentic expression and social consequences remained. Research shows something remarkable. When women communicate through writing, text messages, emails, social posts, the gender communication gap nearly disappears. Why? Because written communication removes the immediate social penalties that shaped centuries of verbal adaptation. Your wife's text saying, "Can we talk tonight?" isn't vague. It's crystal clear communication using a medium where she can speak directly without calculating facial expressions, voice tone, or immediate social reactions. But artificial intelligence is about to change this game entirely. AI systems are being trained to recognize communication patterns, emotional intelligence, and relationship dynamics. The very skills women have been mastering for centuries while being told they don't communicate clearly. Imagine AI systems that can detect the sophisticated emotional algorithms your colleague runs before speaking up in meetings. Picture technology that recognizes the relationship maintenance work your mother does in every family conversation. What happens when machines confirm that women's confusing communication is actually advanced social intelligence? The digital revolution isn't changing how women communicate. It's finally giving us the tools to see how sophisticated their communication has always been. And that brings us to the most important question of all. What happens when the next generation grows up with these tools? And now we arrive at the most revolutionary part of this story, the generation that's rewriting everything. Meet Gen Z women. They grew up with those digital tools we just talked about, and something extraordinary happened. They never learned to silence their archetypal voices in the first place. Watch a 20-year-old woman communicate today. She switches from mother mode, nurturing her friend through a breakup, to queen mode, calling out injustice in a viral TikTok, to mystic mode, sharing her mental health journey, all in the same day, all without apology, all with stunning clarity. She doesn't say, "I'm fine," when she's not fine. She says, "I'm struggling with anxiety today, and I need some space to process." She doesn't soften her authority with questions. When she knows something, she states it directly. This approach won't work, and here's why. What changed? She never learned that her natural archetypal communication was wrong. But here's what's fascinating. This generational shift is revealing something profound about those confusing older generations. Gen Z women aren't communicating better. They're communicating with less interference from the silencing system we've been uncovering. Your mother's generation learned to say, "I'm fine," because direct expression of needs carried social consequences. Your daughter's generation says, "I need support right now," because they grew up in digital spaces where authentic expression was rewarded, not punished. Same archetypal wisdom, different level of permission to express it. Research shows that younger generations have higher emotional intelligence, more sophisticated relationship skills, and clearer communication patterns. But they're not more emotionally evolved. They're just operating in an environment that doesn't punish their natural archetypal voices. This is creating what psychologists call communication evolution in real time. For the first time in centuries, we can see what women's communication looks like when it's not filtered through systems designed to silence it. And the results are breathtaking. When women can express their archetypal voices without penalty, they don't become confusing or indirect. They become precisely what they've always been underneath the adaptive layers: incredibly sophisticated communicators who can navigate emotional complexity, build authentic relationships, and lead with both authority and empathy. The ancient patterns aren't disappearing, they're finally being expressed at full power, which brings us full circle to where we started. Remember that moment when she said, "I'm fine," and her eyes told a different story. Now you have the keys to decode what was really happening. She wasn't being confusing. She wasn't hiding her meaning. She was speaking in the most sophisticated communication language humans have ever developed, and we simply didn't know how to listen. Remember when we started? You asked a woman, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Nothing." But you knew something definitely was. Now you understand what was really happening in that moment. Her brain ran a sophisticated emotional algorithm in 0.3 seconds, calculating relationship safety, timing dynamics, and archetypal responses. She wasn't hiding meaning. She was communicating in the most advanced emotional language humans have ever developed. Her nothing contained layers of data about trust, processing needs, and protective wisdom that your question couldn't even access. The story in her eyes wasn't contradiction. It was the full context of what nothing means when spoken in the ancient language of emotional intelligence. Every woman in your life, your mother, partner, daughter, colleague, has been speaking this sophisticated language while we judged it as confusion. The practical implications are staggering. Relationships transform when you stop trying to decode problems and start recognizing genius. Workplaces evolve when collaborative intelligence gets valued alongside assertive communication. This revelation spirals into everything: leadership, technology, the future of human connection itself. So here's the question that only makes sense now that you've completed this journey. If women's confusing communication is actually emotional mastery, what other human behaviors have we completely misunderstood? Ready to join a community that sees human communication through transformed eyes? Because once you learn to hear emotional genius, the whole world starts speaking differently.